The second reason is that I'm an ex-teacher and the founder of a children's charity, which gives me an interest in both education and safeguarding. Like many others, I have deep concerns about the effect that trans rights movement is having on both. This paragraph is so vague I can't even comment on it. Who are the people having these concerns and what kind of concerns are they having? If I knew the kind of concerns, maybe I could help calm you down. But honestly, I don't understand what effects the trans movement is having on education and safeguarding. So, yeah. The third is that as a much banned author, I'm interested in freedom of speech and have publicly defended it even unto Donald Trump. Okay, you said that these were the reasons that you were worried about the new trans movement, new trans activism. So is the trans activists trying to abolish free speech? That's not a part of any trans activism that I have seen. We are very much for free speech, thank you very much. The fourth is where things starts to get truly personal. I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning, returning to their original sex, because they regret taking steps that have, in some cases, altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted, and that transitioning was partly driven by homophobia, either in society or in their families. Okay. More and more people of both biological sexes want to transition now because they have found out that that is an option. And as such, with more and more people transitioning, unfortunately there will be a portion, a very, very small portion of those people who change their minds afterwards and want to detransition. That happens. I am not saying it doesn't. It is just not common at all. She's also making it out like when you have transitioned, you are, for lack of a better term, ruined. If I were to want to detransition, I would stop taking hormones, which would change my body fat distribution and my ability to build muscle. It would reduce body hair and facial hair, and my period would start up again. I would not regrow my breasts, but I could have implants put in to get those back if I wanted. My voice would also not change, but I could alter that myself. For the record, I have a much lower voice now, but only because the range of my voice has increased to be much lower than it was before. I can still speak with a much higher pitch if I wanted to, so I could just train myself to do that. And I know for anyone who has had bottom surgery, it's a different story. They won't be able to have biological children. And I know that people who want to go from a woman back to a man, in some cases have a harder time doing so. But what I'm saying here is that while it is bad, it is very unfortunate that some people, again, very, very few people, change their mind and want to go back to the way they were. And in many cases, that can't be done with, coming back to exactly the way your body functioned before. Rowling is painting a worst case scenario here, which is not relevant to a lot of people. Also, I want to say that the options are not fully transitioning or staying the way you are. There are steps in between, and I know that at least my clinic here in Sweden is working very closely with their patients to find the best place to go to. If that is for a biological woman to have top surgery but not start taking hormones, or taking hormones but no surgery, or anything like that, they are trying to find the result that the patient is most comfortable with. And I don't think that my clinic here in Sweden is the only place that is taking very, very good care to make sure that their patients are happy. I hope that every clinic working with trans people are doing that. Also, I don't see it as a bad thing that more and more people are questioning their gender identity. A lot of the people who do start questioning their gender identity eventually decide that, no, it matches with my body, or it matches close enough with my body, and I know now that I have questioned it, what I can do to be more comfortable. And now that argument about people wanting to transition because they have realized that they're gay and they're trying to escape homophobia is absolutely ridiculous. This is something that I was asked when I was transitioning. Are you sure you're not just a lesbian? And it's just unfathomable to me how people can think that, okay, I want to escape homophobia, so instead I'm going to transition and face transphobia instead, which is in some cases much worse. And anyone who is homophobic, I am pretty sure, in my experience, they're also going to be transphobic. So this doesn't help at all. Not to mention, in my experience, again, this is not a scientific observation, it's just an observation among the trans people that I've met. It is quite common for trans people to also not be straight, whether they're gay or bi or whatever. So it's a weird argument from that standpoint as well. And also just transitioning is a long process. It is painful, it is mentally exhausting, it is very expensive in many places. It is not an easy option for someone who doesn't dare come out as gay. I have so much to say about this, but we're gonna move on now. Most people probably aren't aware, I certainly wasn't until I started researching this issue properly, that 10 years ago the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. That ratio has now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred for transitioning treatment. Autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers. First, I'm pretty sure she's misgendering here, and what was more common before was male to female transitioning, and now it is female to male instead. Just want to say that. Also, yes, again, in my experience, in my observation, it is relatively common for trans people to also be autistic. I don't see how it's relevant. Autistic people can still reach an informed and proper conclusion on their gender identity. The two are not even... I don't know why she brought that up. I also want to say that for someone who is scared about the transgender agenda, I guess, the 4,400% increase might look huge. It looks very, very scary, but I just want to look at the actual numbers there. Because in absolute numbers, I looked this up, apparently 40 biological girls were referred for gender treatment in, I don't remember the year now, but either way, 7 years later, in like 17, 18, something like that, the number was 1,806. And again, this is in the UK, so the population of the UK is, what, 65 million? It is, I wrote that up, 68 million, almost 68 million people. I don't know how many of those people are biological girls, but either way, in such a large population, under 2,000 biological girls being referred for gender treatment is not a huge number. And I also want to say that all of those biological girls are not going to end up transitioning. They are just questioning their gender identity, and many of them might decide that transitioning is just not for them. Also, like I've already said, it makes complete sense that more and more people are questioning their gender identity, and I do not see a problem with that, as long as their questions are met by professionals who are able to handle their questions in a respectful and qualified way, so that these people are not made more confused or feel like they are not being taken seriously. As long as they can have a good, respectful, informed conversation about gender identity and be helped to find their way to wherever they end up, there is absolutely no problem with more and more people questioning their gender identity. Now, let's move on, and here is a section that I'm not going to read out loud. You can pause the video if you want to read this, but basically it is a physician and researcher from the US who has expressed concern that social media is contributing to more and more youths questioning their gender identity. She published a paper, was criticized for it, and apparently her career was damaged. The part I am going to quote is, Littman had dared challenge one of the central tenets of trans activism, which is that a person's gender identity is innate, like sexual orientation. Nobody, the activist insisted, could ever be persuaded into being trans. This is true. I truly believe this. No one can be persuaded into being trans. People can, however, be persuaded into questioning their gender identity, like I said. And again, as long as they have someone qualified to talk about this, I believe that that will make them more secure in whatever gender they end up settling on, and also have a greater understanding of the difference between sex and gender, which is a good thing. And also, they might not actually settle. Gender fluid people exist and are also valid. Moving on, the argument of many current trans activists is that if you don't let a gender dysphoric teenager transition, they will kill themselves. In an article explaining why he resigned from the Tavistock, an NHS gender clinic in England, psychiatrist Markus stated that claims that children will kill themselves if not permitted to transition do not align substantially with any robust data or studies in this area, nor do they align with the cases I have encountered over decades as a psychotherapist. I haven't read this article. I also don't know how it looks in the UK, but I'm pretty sure that in the UK and most other places, just like in Sweden, children and teenagers are not allowed to transition. What they are allowed to do is take a medicine that will pause puberty. And they're allowed to do this if a doctor deems that it's a good idea. And if this child, when it is old enough, decides that they do want to transition, this transition is going to be much, much better. It's going to have a much, much better result than if they had gone through puberty. And if they decide that they do not want to transition, they can just stop taking this medicine and puberty will start back up and they will develop as the biological sex that they have. No harm has been done. This is not irreversible. They will just potentially go through puberty a little bit later than most others. And once again, you are not necessarily dealing with children killing themselves the moment that they find out that they're not allowed to transition. But a trans person who is forced to live as their biological sex for their entire life or for a long time is at a very, very, very high risk of depression and suicide.